9/11 truth leaders throughout the world have seen this information, and they were bowled over by it, by the solidness of the evidence and the surprising conclusions. David Ray Griffin, this will transform the discussion of what happened on 9/11. Robin Horden, this changed. Richard Gage, this presentation blew me away, and I could go on, but they're amazing feedback. They keep going. So this presentation is going to cover the review of the major 9/11 truth events of the past year, laying the evidential groundwork to bring the real perpetrators to justice, what happened at the Pentagon and didn't, and why it mattered. All right, the next slide. The Project for New American Century, of course, called for, people don't know, that the, what I call the PNAC Manifesto was published exactly a year before 9/11, September 11th, 2000. Now, it is my contention that I'm going to support here that only an attack on an iconic national military facility like Pearl Harbor would have turned the 9/11 attacks into a new Pearl Harbor. The World Trade Center attacks would not have been sufficient. It would have been seen as a bigger World Trade Center 93 attack or a bigger Oklahoma City. And both of those attacks had been handled perfectly well by the civilian court system. And of course, the neocons wanted for that not to be the case. They wanted us to be able to say that we were at war in order to domination agenda and their domestic surveillance state. Bush actually said it was the Pentagon attack. He said it publicly over and over. That made it war in his mind. He was the president, after all, with Article II commander-in-chief powers. In his memoirs, his book that he's published, and in his speeches after the memoir was published, he said that after World War I was hit, he thought, as you know, that it was a terrible accident, terrible pilot. When he was told by Andrew Card, whispering in his ear in the Florida classroom, that, quote, America is under attack, and we have to take both Card and Bush's word for that, don't we? I don't necessarily believe that, but that's the official story. Assuming it's true even, Bush puts out that official story in his memoirs and speeches, and he says, when Card whispered in my ear and said, America's under attack, he thought America's under attack. However, he said with the Pentagon attack, he knew we were at war. Now, Bush wanted to be a war president before he even ran for president and had said so. So you need the Pentagon attack to make Bush the war president he said he wanted to be before he even ran and stole the 2000 election to get the power. The Pentagon attack, therefore, had to succeed of all of the attacks to affect the global domination agenda and the surveillance state agenda. And therefore, insiders had to be able to control, of course, not only the World Trade Center attacks, but also the Pentagon attack. And because they had to control it, and it had to succeed, especially the Pentagon attack, only, as we will see, only pre-placed explosives inside the building guaranteed their massive smoke clouds and psyops that were necessary in order to convince the public that there had been a major attack on the Pentagon. Many people don't know this, but there was an offer by Nicholas Rockefeller to Aaron Russo, in case anybody has any doubt that the Project for New American Century group, the Rockefeller family and the neocons, had the entire plan before 9/11. Nicholas Rockefeller, and you can see Aaron Russo saying this on videotape before he died on the web. Nicholas Rockefeller, whose family built the Twin Towers, told film producer Russo in September 2000, exactly when the PNAC Manifesto was being published, quote, there's going to be an event, and out of that event we're going to invade Afghanistan so we can run pipelines through the Caspian, so we can go into Iraq and take the oil and establish bases in the Middle East to make the Middle East part of the New World Order. That's pretty clear. And in my relationships, he continued to tell Russo, with some of these people, I can tell you that's as evil as it gets. This is a truly evil plot. It's not just these are not just bad people. This is a diabolical plot. He also told Russo that if he joined them, went along with them, that Russo would be spared the police state domestic U.S. measures that would then be imposed upon the rest of the American public, i.e. all of us here in this room. To get their new Pearl Harbor, the Project for New American Century signatories had to steal the election. They had to make George W. Bush, who said he wanted to be a war president before he even ran for office, he had to make him president to become a war president. And they, in fact, stole the election, as you know, in Florida, where George W. Bush's brother, Jeb, was governor. And then, once they stole the election with the Florida votes, stopped counting them, then there was the unconstitutional decision in Bush v. Gore, in which the election was further stolen by the Republican plants in the Supreme Court, who completely violated the explicit letter of the Constitution that makes it clear that only the House of Representatives can vote to break a tie, basically, or overcome a conflict in a presidential election. Instead, the Supreme Court called the election. And who did that, who argued that, but Ted Olson, and this is linked to the Pentagon attack because it's his wife, Barbara Olson, who was allegedly on the Pentagon plane, and according to the official story, which David Ray Griffin has proven is false, that Barbara Olson's alleged phone calls to her husband, Ted Olson, who argued Bush v. Gore, which stole the election, which made Bush the president, the war, and 9/11 made him the war president. Barbara Olson's cell phone calls simply did not happen. And we now have that from the FBI in the Moussaoui case, saying that they lasted 0 seconds, i.e. they were attempted but never got through. And this has now been confirmed by American Airlines and the Pentagon. This is per David Ray Griffin's research. So Bush planned on being a war president before even running for office. With Bush's election, the signatories of the Project for New American Century Manifesto, led by the Rockefellers, one of whom told Russo everything they had planned exactly a year before 9/11, as the PNAC manifesto came out, then became the United States government. You're going to see that slide in a moment. I've looked at all of the Project for New American Century manifesto signatories and participants. There were 2 levels of participation, and they literally became the United States government. Every single position needed to carry out, to plan, carry out, and cover up the attacks of 9/11. And once in power, again, only the Pentagon attack guaranteed Bush becoming the war president that he had said he wanted to be before even running. This page continues on down. These are simply the names of the signatories and participants in the PNAC manifesto signed a year before 9/11 who took over the United States government, just one after the other in their positions. Only the Pentagon attack enabled "We are at war." Now, this is interesting. This is a very important photograph that was on the Washington Post website the day of 9/11, just after the attacks. And they've already got their propaganda poster ready behind the General Zahner of the National Security Agency. And what's important about General Zahner, who was quoted in the Washington Post with "We are at war" behind him just immediately after the attacks, is that he headed the National Security Agency's unit that had surveilled all of the calls from al-Qaeda's global communications headquarters in Yemen for at least a year and a half or 2 years before the attacks. They knew absolutely everything about the plot. The new Pearl Harbor and war memes were pushed by the mainstream media as the attacks were literally underway. Tom Brokaw, for instance, as the attacks were unfolding before the towers fell, they were smoking, he said, "There's been a declaration of war on the U.S. by terrorists. This is the most serious attack on the U.S. by Pearl Harbor since Pearl Harbor." There were many, many other quotes I could give you of newscasters and top administration officials referring to Pearl Harbor. The new Pearl Harbor insider script, what did it require to be implemented on 9/11? It required the appearance of, at the very minimum, a surprise attack like Pearl Harbor. You know, that was the most important thing, with Condoleezza Rice and Bush and Cheney and everyone going on TV and saying, "We couldn't have imagined it." That was a way of saying it was a surprise. It has to be a surprise attack, and it's a kamikaze attack. just like Pearl Harbor. Except on 9/11, the script was planes would be used as weapons against buildings instead of against ships. This is a Pearl Harbor script. A critical mass of innocent deaths was required. Those are the next slides coming up. All right, we've already discussed this. Zelikow, of course, was a close associate of Condoleezza Rice, who was National Security Advisor to President Bush and very close to Bush. And Zelikow was an expert, as many of us know, on creating public myths and, most people don't know this, also maintaining public presumptions. In other words, he's an expert on state lies and state cover-ups. And that's on his own bio. The White House approved all major exercise scenarios. That's a personal interview I did with Richard Clark, the counterterrorism advisor in the White House under Condoleezza Rice on 9/11. I personally interviewed him, and he told me that the White House approves all major exercise scenarios in advance. Those are military exercises. And as we know, on the morning of 9/11, there were hijack scenario exercises being conducted by NORAD Northeast Sector, the precise NORAD-NEAD sector that did not respond for some hour and 45 minutes to the alleged attacks of 9/11. All right. And that approval had to have come from Rice and Clark himself, because Clark was the counterterrorism advisor. Ensuring the critical mass of innocent deaths, especially at the World Trade Center, I believe was critical to their very diabolical plot. The two attacks at the World Trade Center, 15 minutes apart, of course, were designed to ensure a maximum live audience for the second tower being hit and the tower's collapse. Literally millions of people were by then watching. After the World Trade Center was attacked in 1993, federal agents, and this was reported, you can see Stephen Emerson, who is not a nice guy in my book, but he is a very right-wing journalist, and very much a neocon himself. But he states on the internet in an interview that after World Trade Center 93 was attacked, federal agents told him in person that there had not been enough deaths that time. And as we know from the books like 1,000 Years for Revenge and others, we know that the FBI actually provided the bomb materials for the World Trade Center attack in 1993, and actually when the Egyptian intelligence agent who was their informant told them that the alleged terrorists were ready to go forward with the actual attack and that they had to take the bomb materials away, he said, no, let them go ahead. So that's our FBI. And it was in fact federal agents, which is almost certain a reference to the FBI, told Stephen Emerson after the 93 World Trade Center attacks there hadn't been enough deaths that time. So they were going to have to try harder and do whatever it took to have more deaths the next time. And after the impacts, but before the towers fell on 9/11, just a minute, after the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center towers, the roof doors were ordered locked by official New York City policy, by the New York City Fire Department. This is a fact. And so on 9/11, anyone above the fire zones were trapped, terrorizing and killing all innocent victims above. According to the New York Times, an estimated or a known from their 911 cell phone calls, the New York Times states that it is known that at least 105 victims above the impact zones had gotten to the roof doors only to find them locked and then died in the towers. Horrible, diabolical plot. After the impacts and before the towers fell, in addition, this is interviews that I have done with people who know on the inside, dozens of military and civilian helicopters, good guys, just got in their helicopters. They self-ordered themselves. They didn't wait for orders. They just assumed that what their superiors would want was to try to save the people from the World Trade Center towers one way or the other. And they self-dispatched towards the towers, but they were ordered to land at a nearby base so that they could not respond and rescue. Paul Wolfowitz, one of the top signatories of the PNAC Manifesto, Deputy Secretary of Defense, before and on 9/11. These are quotes from him right after 9/11 that speak to this critical mass of deaths. Wolfowitz predicted after the attacks that the 9/11 attacks would soon be found to have resulted in a greater number of American deaths than any single day since the Civil War, more than any single day in World War I, or that should read World War II, and that Americans would finally now be willing to sacrifice their lives in great numbers for the cause of defeating terrorism worldwide. And then he also quoted Winston Churchill, "America is like a great boiler. Once it gets fired up, the energy it generates is enormous." This is energy that the neocons and the Zionists could use to use American blood and treasure to perpetrate their own ends. This was also echoed by Newsweek. More people were killed, Newsweek said right after the attacks, by suicide hijackers last week than the number of American soldiers killed in the entire American Revolution, or at Antietam, the bloodiest day in the Battle of the Civil War, or at Pearl Harbor, or on D-Day. So the media was hyped up to make Americans believe that this was the worst attack in our entire history. But they made sure that it had the greatest number of deaths. 9/11, therefore, was not just an evil plot, it was an actually absolutely diabolical plot. So now, proof that a 77 did not hit the Pentagon at the alleged impact point in Wedge 1, and therefore the official Pentagon story is a lie. And again, why is this so critically important? Because it's the Pentagon attack that if we can prove, absolutely prove, that the official story is a lie, then we prove that a new Pearl Harbor did not happen. I consider it the most important thing that we could do in the 9/11 truth movement. So first, we're going to look at what didn't happen at the Pentagon. I know that a lot of you already know a lot of this, but you may not know some of it. We're going to get to what I've learned did happen at the Pentagon after this, but I'm going to quickly go through what did not happen and how we know that it didn't happen. So what didn't happen at the Pentagon is what the government and the 9/11 Commission report says happened. This is actually a slide from the Pentagon itself. That's the Pentagon logo of Pentagon spokesman at the Pentagon's own press conference right after 9/11. And this is the graphic that he was showing of the official story, alleged impact point. And so this is the graphically displayed official version of 9/11. This is the west side of the Pentagon, as most of you know. And most people don't know, as you'll see more clearly in slides in a moment, that the Wedge 1 that had just been upgraded and hardened specifically to withstand a terrorist attack either by a bomb or a lateral impact of a plane is not the whole west side. Most people think it's the whole west side. It's not. It's from the center line of the west side around this corner to the center line of this side over here. So from the center line left, it was not yet hardened. You'll see that's very important. Okay. Now there are some blank slides, so okay.
Now when you say is the...
I'm getting to that. I think I will answer your questions. Okay. All right, the west heliport side of the Pentagon. This whole side is the west side. This is where the official story says Flight 77 came in at almost 9:38. The official story says Flight 77 came in almost to ground level, did 95% of its damage on only the first floor, which is only 12 feet high to the ceiling, only about 5% on the second floor, according to the Pentagon Building Performance Report itself, totally physically impossible, came in at about a 45-degree angle and hit way over here in the Wedge 1 that had been hardened specifically to withstand such a plane impact or a bomb or both. Okay? Now, this whole west side, however, from the center, because we're looking this way, this is actually the center line, where the heliport is. There's an H here. The Pentagon has its own heliport, and this little building, this photograph, the aerial photograph was taken before 9/11, but shortly before. This little building here is very important for what actually happened at the Pentagon. It is the Pentagon Heliport Firehouse. And this is the north, that's the south, this is the west face, okay? So that's actually the center line, and from here to here is 450 feet, from there to there is 450 feet. It's important to know for the analysis in a moment that every single one of these windows on the Pentagon, between the center of a window to a center of a window, is 10 feet, and therefore you just count the number of feet. That's the way you can tell how far something is from something else. All right, so this is the center line right here, and so the heliport firehouse, right above it is a little tiny building on the roof of the heliport firehouse where they had the fire engines, and on the roof was the heliport air traffic controller, where actually 2 air traffic controllers were looking out because the VIPs, the president, the vice president, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, they liked to go in and out, directly in and out of the Pentagon on helicopters, and then they would go to Andrews Air Force Base from there, so they didn't have to drive back and forth from the Pentagon. And most people also don't know that on the morning of 9/11, until the attack started happening, when Bush was in Florida, he was pre-scheduled to arrive at that heliport between noon and 12:30. Most people don't know that. That turns out to be extremely important. All right.
So that flat side faces
I think we need questions on a mic. I'm not sure. Do we need questions on a mic? Or can you hear it?
Switch back and forth and wait for questions later.
Yeah, I would appreciate questions later. I think I'm going to answer your just pretty detailed presentation. All right, what I've done here is actually, this says properly scaled, but when you actually count, if you count 10 feet for each one of these windows, this graphic, which is very famous in the 9/11 Truth Movement, it's in Plain Sight by Dave Von Kleist and a number of other films and on the web. This plane is much larger. It's not properly scaled. A 757 would not be this large. But the point is that this does show where the official story says how low the plane was, which is absurd. And this is even a better photograph. The official story actually states that a 757 going at approximately 560 miles an hour, according to the alleged flight data recorder of the plane, was literally coming in at almost parallel to ground level, and 90 to 95% of the damage on the alleged inside penetration path was in the first floor, which is only 12 feet to the ceiling. Now, you're going to see why that is physically impossible. First off, a 757's massive 6-ton steel and titanium engines extend 9 feet below the bottom of the fuselage. So, based on the Pentagon building performance report itself, that performance report states the top of the fuselage body was no more than, in fact, you can show it was less than 20 feet above the ground. However, the body of a 757 is almost 12 and a half feet wide in diameter, leaving less than 8 feet between the bottom of the fuselage and the ground. But the engines extend 9 feet below. The engines would have had to have gouged the lawn. They did not at the official story impact point. If the official story were true, the lawn should have looked like this. It did not. Instead, it looked like this. Now, this is a very famous photograph. You've seen it many, many, many times. People who claim that no plane was destroyed at the Pentagon always use this so-called pristine lawn photograph to prove that. I'm going to show you that that is false, that there was a plane destruction at the Pentagon, just not where the official story says and not when the official story says. So the official story claims that Flight 77 came in over that lawn, right above the lawn, should have scraped its titanium and steel engines over that lawn, which isn't the case, went in at a 45-degree angle right there, that its right wing hit this diesel trailer and caused this huge smoke cloud to go up, and then plowed into the wall and went in 3 rings, popped its nose or some part of the plane out of the 3rd ring in the C-ring, so-called C-ring exit hole. That is the official story. Now, this is just a blank, okay. Now, one of the ways that you prove that the official story, there are many ways to do it, is a complete lie, is that the, whatever actually, the first violent event at the Pentagon, I've known for years and years, since about 2002, stopped multiple Pentagon clocks, multiple Pentagon wall clocks, very close to each other and way before the official story says Flight 77 got even close to the building. The official story says that Flight 77 impacted the building at 9:37 and 46 seconds, almost 9:38. However, this clock is stopped at 9:32 and 30, basically 9:32 and 30 seconds. This one, depending upon how you read it, 9:31 and 40 seconds. These clocks are independently set. And this one is the important one, as you'll see. It's from the heliport, that little heliport firehouse. Turns out to be very, very important because this clock was stopped outside the Pentagon proper. This one was stopped inside the Navy section of the Pentagon, which is way in. It's not even in the first ring in, it's in the second and third rings in. Believe it or not, the heliport clock, which turns out to be critical, is actually stopped at 9:32 and 30 seconds by some violent event. We're going to see what it was. Is actually in the Smithsonian Institution's official 9/11 exhibit. There it is. And it's just to the left. You can go and see this very exhibit today. Just to the right of it is Ted Olson's phone, on which he allegedly spoke to his wife, Barbara Olson, on which those cell phone calls we know did not happen. So both of these objects are related to the Pentagon attack. There's another blank screen. All right. There are multiple witnesses. I asked myself, so some violent event stopped the heliport firehouse clock at 9:32 and 30 seconds. What was that event? I went looking for it. And I found it. It was very easy to find it. Once you ask the right question, then you can get to the right answer. Multiple witnesses stated that a white low-flying plane approached the Pentagon on a south of Navy Annex, south of Sitco Path. In other words, on the side that the official story says Flight 77 came in on, but it didn't. And that white plane, that early white plane, hit, dragged, or scraped its left wing at or near the helipad just before bursting into a huge fireball. And as all American Airlines plane bodies, civilian airliner bodies, are polished aluminum, they are silvery. They are definitely not seen as white. So, if there's a plane that came in and something happened to it at the heliport or near the heliport at 9:32 and 30 seconds, 5 minutes and 16 seconds before the official story says Flight 77 was anywhere close. In fact, it was like 70 miles outside of Washington, D.C. then. Even if it was Flight 77, it could not have been even an American Airlines plane. Witness Jim Sutherland saw a white twin-engine plane with multicolored horizontal stripes like an American Airlines airliner would have, flying at estimated 50 feet above, coming in almost parallel or straight line approach over 395 towards the building. Two of the three Pentagon heliport firefighters, that little firehouse that I showed you to the left, which is to the north, on the west face, but to the left, going north of the midline, to the left or north of the heliport pad, the helipad. They were in the firehouse, and one of them, Alan Wallace, had, because they were then expecting Bush to arrive at the heliport, and in case there was a crash, they always pull the fire trucks out and park them outside so they would be ready. He had just opened the big door of the heliport firehouse, pulled the fire truck out, and backed it with its back to the wall, the west wall, facing out perpendicular with its back to the wall and its front out. And he and the other heliport firefighter, his name is Mark Skipper, were, if this is the west wall, and this is the heliport, and that's the heliport firehouse, they had just parked their fire truck here, parallel to the wall, as you'll see in a moment in the photograph, to the firehouse, and had just gotten out and were walking along the side, between the side of the fire truck and the heliport firehouse on their right, the truck on their left, when Alan Wallace states very clearly in his public statements that he has published, he says, "I looked to my left." He emphasizes left. Left would be to the south path, not the Citizens Investigation Team north path, witness path, the south path. He said, "I looked to my left and saw a white plane," there's the white plane again, "approaching the heliport, the helipad, and exploding into a fireball right next to the firehouse, which would have actually killed them had they not seen it." They guesstimated, even though it was coming at that 45-degree angle towards them, they guesstimated when they saw it, because they couldn't see it until they got just beyond the nose of the fire truck, they looked to their left, and oh my God, it was about 200 to 250 feet away, coming straight towards them. And they ran. And they did survive. One of them jumped under a van just on the outside of the heliport firehouse. Another one, Skipper ran further out on the lawn and just jumped. And they both did survive. They were burned, but they did survive. Okay. It came on a south of Navy Annex path. Wallace emphasized it came to his left, as we've seen. He said, like the other witnesses, that it was white, a white plane. He emphasized a white plane with 2 horizontal colored stripes that appeared to him to be orange and blue, but were probably red or red, orange, and blue, intended to simulate an American Airlines airliner, to pretend, to fake people out, to believe it was an American Airlines airliner. To avoid being hit by the white plane, Alan Wallace, one of the 3 heliport firefighters who were on duty from Fort Myers that morning at the heliport firehouse, pending Bush's expected arrival between noon and 12:30 at the heliport at the Pentagon, he ran towards the outer wall of the heliport to cover under the van. Immediately afterwards, after the fireball, he came out from under the van, looked around, and he said, this is in his published statement, everything was on fire. The grass is on fire. The building is on fire. The firehouse is on fire. There was fire everywhere. Areas of the blacktop, meaning the helipad, were on fire. There was debris everywhere. This is obviously whatever this plane hit its left wing, exploded. What he calls debris, I'm almost certain, is plane wreckage debris. The trees were on fire. The back end of the fire truck that he and Mark Skipper had just parked facing with his back to the Pentagon was also on fire. Inside the firehouse, whose door was still open, having just brought the fire truck out, this huge pressure wave from this explosion, I believe, of the white plane, what else could it be, also caused the heliport firehouse clock to fall off the wall and stop. And that's the clock that stopped at 9:32 and 30 seconds. Inside the heliport firehouse, the 3rd fireman, who was still inside, Dennis Young, he said that the firehouse was filled with smoke and debris, that the ceiling crumbled. Even the official Pentagon report called Pentagon 9/11 states that the fireball and the pressure wave may have actually gone into the firehouse through the door that was still open. Now this is a photograph. This is a very important photograph to see. This is a photograph. This is the firehouse. The heliport is out here. The official story impact point is way down here to the south. That's to the north. This is the west wall. Here's the south edge of that heliport firehouse that goes like this with a heliport air traffic controller perch on top of it. This is exactly what Alan Wallace and Mark Skipper said they saw. The trees are burned. This is burned. The heliport, there was debris all over it, all over this area. And some of these firefighters are, in fact, those Fort Myers firefighters. Multiple witnesses saw the plane's left wing just before the fireball hit, scrape, or drag. They used different words for the same experience on the helipad just before it burst into a fireball. One said the left wing of the plane touched the ground by the helicopter pad. The left wing dipped and scraped the helicopter area. The left wing touched the helipad. All different witnesses' statements. The plane dragged its left wing along the ground before exploding. It looked like it hit the helicopter pad, then skipped up. The plane caught the edge of its left wing on the ground. There is a helicopter pad right in front of the left side of the Pentagon. The wing touched there first. Here's another very important photograph. After the fireball, there were what many witnesses called just huge numbers. One of them said millions. It seemed like millions of small pieces of wreckage and debris scattered all over this area, which is to the north. As you're looking at the Pentagon wall, to the north or to the left as you're looking at it from the official story alleged impact point, which is way south. Okay. All right. This is well to the north of the alleged impact point. Debris also rained down, according to witnesses, on I-27. If this is the west wall of the Pentagon, I-27 is out here. It's Washington Boulevard, all that way out, which is like 300 feet away from the wall. And debris, according to some witnesses, also rained down on the Fort Myers walking trail, which is way out there to the northwest. Witness Penny Inglis to the white plane. She went on record that she saw a white, low-flying south approaching plane, the above piece from which she actually claimed fell through her sunroof. and she put this on the web. The inside surface, notice, is dark red. It's also grainy, almost like graphite. I believe that that is a kind of stealthing material. I don't know that, but it's a hypothesis. But what's important about this is if this were a piece of debris from an American Airlines airliner, that would be a kind of yellow-green on the inside of the pieces of a fuselage or a wing. And instead it is dark red. All right? Witness Dennis Cimino. I don't know if you know Dennis Cimino. He is a very important expert witness who testified at the Vancouver hearings, same place I testified in mid-June of last year. The Vancouver hearings and the Toronto hearings were the two major events last year for 9/11 Truth. I spoke at both of them. Dennis Cimino spoke at only Vancouver hearings, and he has a background in the Navy. He was a submariner and an expert in nuclear weapons, and he's also a flight data recorder, FDR expert, and he's also a pilot, and has been quite a fine pilot. And he says that he believes that this looks to him like a piece of white fiberglass, and he believes that the plane that came in, hit its left wing, and then exploded into a fireball was a drone, a fiberglass drone, white fiberglass drone that was shaped and painted to look like, to lead people to believe that it was an American Airlines airliner. I tend to agree with that, but that is a working hypothesis. Here's another perfect example of this is the actual heliport with one of the Fort Myers firefighters walking on this with this immense amount of debris. Right after this white plane came in, hit its left wing, exploded into a fireball, and stopped the heliport firehouse clock. 5 minutes and 16 seconds before the official story says Flight 77 was anywhere close to the building. The closer you get to the wall, there's actually larger pieces of debris. This is another excellent picture, shows all the fire. This is the pristine lawn. It's very important to see. That photograph that I showed before of the pristine lawn outside the alleged impact point, Flight 77 is way down there, right opposite the point over the alleged impact point. It's already collapsed at that point. And this is all towards the heliport firehouse, and the helipad is over here. The pristine lawn doesn't start until there, and then it goes south from there. That's the pristine lawn. This is the destroyed area, which hardly anybody in the 9/11 Truth Movement ever shows you. Why? Now, the helipad is right here, and this is the famous largest piece of alleged Flight 77 debris that fell on the lawn of the Pentagon. Notice all these smaller pieces of more confetti-like debris further towards the wall, okay? And this piece is actually very close to the helipad and is presumably part of that debris. Now, this is amazing. I found this last year and was able to prove it based upon the official radar records from the government itself. There was not just this white plane at the Pentagon that exploded near the heliport. We will get to why it exploded in a moment. But it exploded near the heliport at 9:32 and 30 seconds because the explosion stopped the heliport clock at that time. Other clocks inside the Pentagon also stopped at approximately that time. But there was a helicopter, a military helicopter, at the helipad as that plane came in, according to the radar records, and it arrived at the helipad 4 minutes and 42 seconds before the white plane came in, and then just as the white plane was coming in, it's on the helipad, the white plane comes in, it starts to lift off just as this plane is destroyed. 3 seconds before, as you will see, now here's the radar record. This is the record from Reagan National Airport for what the radar image, the graph with the radar track on it. And this is from the 9/11 Commission report. Labels as MC, which is almost certainly Marine Corps helicopter. That a Marine Corps helicopter was at the Pentagon heliport just 3 seconds before, up until 3 seconds before this white plane comes in. How do we know that? It shows its arrival, meaning its descent below the Reagan Airport radar floor, which is at that point, because Reagan Airport is only a little over a mile from there, it could actually see down to about 100 feet above the ground. So when any plane, helicopter or plane got below 100 feet, then it went off radar. But if the helicopter lifts up, it goes back on radar at 100 feet and above. So it went below 100 feet, it arrived at 9:27 and 51 seconds. It returned to radar visibility at 100 feet and over at 9:32 and 33 seconds. When did the Pentagon clock stop? 9:32 and 31 seconds. That's not a coincidence. I believe that whatever that helicopter was, the Marine Corps helicopter, actually destroyed that white plane.
So this page you're showing
Yes.
is out of the 9/11 report?
That's screen tag. Screen tag also certainly standing for Marine Corps. That isn't on this. The graphic that all of this data was represented on is in the 9/11 Commission report. This is from the radar. I believe it could be the RAIDS 84 radar, but it's from radar reports that Robin Horden has pulled together. And the site, I am finishing a book on 9/11, and all the sites for this are in my book. The same title as this presentation. Should be out in March. I can't remember it right now, but it's an official document. Okay. I believe, as I said, that the near simultaneity of the helicopter liftoff, Marine Corps helicopter. Now, there's reason to believe that that was Marine Corps 1. In other words, the president's helicopter. Because Bush was expected to come in. Okay. Not until noon, and this happened at a little after 9:30, but there's a working hypothesis could actually be Marine Corps 1, or a Marine Corps helicopter perhaps for Rumsfeld, or a Marine Corps helicopter for Wolfowitz, but certainly a Marine Corps helicopter coming in to pick up a very high-ranking official at the Pentagon. All right. So I believe that the effective simultaneity within 2 to 3 seconds of the helicopter lifting off from the area of the helipad and the white plane coming into it and being destroyed into these confetti-like millions of pieces before it was able to hit the wall just beyond the helipad is not a coincidence. And in fact, most people don't know this. You'll find this in David Ray Griffin's more recent books. Naval historian John Sherwood U.S. Navy historian John Sherwood told a very important Pentagon eyewitness, Jeffrey Mark Parsons, who himself was a helicopter pilot, happened to be, who was in a hotel beyond I-395 looking at the Pentagon from the 17th floor. The naval historian John Sherwood interviewed him because he was an eyewitness and for the historical record. And Sherwood, the historian, told the witness in their interaction during this interview that a helicopter was sent to the Pentagon by the White House to prevent the incoming plane from going into the Pentagon, which is precisely what the near simultaneity of the radar record and the eyewitness testimony of the white plane coming in actually totally 100% supports. This is witness Jeffrey Mark Parsons himself from the 17th floor of his hotel across I-395. This is quite amazing. He saw a helicopter well before the white plane came in, flying like a bumblebee in this strange erratic pattern, like it was trying to avoid something, being hit, maybe by a missile, who knows, but flying in an erratic pattern between close to his hotel and over to the heliport area and coming back. And then he said it finally disappeared from his perspective where he knew the helipad area was, and shortly after that, then he left his window. And within just a few minutes after that, and we know that it was about 4 minutes and some seconds from the radar record, he said in just a few minutes after that, there was this big explosion. He went back to the window, saw this fireball smoke cloud. So that completely confirms the other witnesses. An Air Force witness to CNN's Chris Plant. Chris Plant went on mainstream television as the Pentagon attacks were happening. He said, I was told by one witness, an Air Force senior enlisted man, that he, the enlisted man, was outside when it occurred. He said he saw a helicopter circling around the building. This is similar to Parsons' language. Okay, so the next slide. Yet further evidence from true experts, pilot experts, that the official story trajectory, again coming in parallel to the ground, 95% of the alleged impact damage to the first floor, which is only about 12 feet to the ceiling, proof that that cannot be true, that it is physically impossible, that the official story alleged trajectory of any 757, Flight 77 or otherwise, at the claimed speed of over 500 miles per hour just above the ground is physically impossible. It is totally, this is a quote from Air Force and commercial airline pilot Russ Wittenberg. It is totally impossible, physically impossible. A 757 could not possibly have been flown at those official story speeds without going into a high-speed stall. The airplane won't go that fast when you start pulling those high-G maneuvers. That plane would have fallen out of the sky long before, he claims, it got anywhere close to the ground if it was truly a 757 going at the speeds that the alleged flight data recorder said it was. This is even a more important quote. Certified Top Gun U.S. Navy pilot Ralph Kolstad, whom I personally interviewed. He has over 26,000 flight hours, including 6,000 flight hours in Boeing 757s for American Airlines, including the physical planes that flew as Flight 77 and 11 on the morning of 9/11. He states, after reviewing the evidence, I could not have flown it the way the official story flight path was described at the Pentagon. I was a Navy fighter pilot and an air combat instructor and have experience flying low-altitude, high-speed aircraft. I could not have done what these alleged hijacker beginner pilots, what these beginners did, or was claimed that they did. Something stinks to high heaven, unquote, about the official story. Now, I discovered this, and I think this is extremely compelling evidence that a Flight 77 or any Boeing 757 could not possibly have done what the official story says. This is yet another reason. The official story claims that at the time that Flight 77 approached the building at 9:37 and 46 seconds, that it had gone out from Dulles Airport, turned around and come back east, and had only been in the air 1 hour and 17 minutes, and that it was supposed to have gone to Los Angeles with full fuel on board. There are 3 main fuel tanks in a 757. This is taken from Boeing's own website. The smallest one, the smaller one, is in the center fuselage. The 2 largest ones are in the wings. The wings are flying fuel tanks. The official story claims that the leading edge of those wings of a Boeing 757 coming in about 560 miles per hour hit 5 light poles, 240-pound light poles, standing light poles, in sequence, and that these flying fuel bombs did not explode, and that the wings were not even breached. And this is a photograph of one of those light poles that a 757 allegedly hit. They're huge. And this is a graphic of where those light poles are that the official story claims, coming in on that diagonal path, that the leading edge of the right wing hit 1, 2 poles, and the leading edge of the left wing hit 3 poles. Certified Top Gun Navy pilot Ralph Kolstad again. This is an interview with me that I recorded. If a 757 hit a light pole, even 1 light pole, going at that high speed, it would have ripped open the wing's fuel tank, and that wing would have erupted into flames, into a fireball. That's before it even got to the wall. The wings and probably the entire plane with them would have been destroyed before it could even get to the building, unquote. When the leading edge of the wing of this jet hit just a single light pole, it sheared the wing off. This is an actual event. Sheared the wing off, spilled jet fuel and wreckage over 100 feet, and crashed the entire plane. When this happened, the same thing happened to a larger, that was a smaller plane than a 757 you just saw. But when this happened, hitting 2 light poles to a larger airliner, similar in size to a 757, which was in Detroit in 1987, 18 feet sheared off the left wing when it hit 2 light poles in a row going at only 222 miles per hour versus Flight 77 allegedly, one of its wings hitting 3 light poles and the other 2 light poles without any kind of problem to the plane, that it made it all the way to the wall without exploding first.
18 feet sheared off.
The 18, well, where yes, it hit the pole 18 feet in from the tip, yes.
Okay.
And it completely just severed it like a knife cutting through butter.
Did that cause a big fire?
That wasn't stated, so I don't know. I don't know. Yes, I'm trying to find out. Good question. The question was, did it in fact cause a fireball? Did it cause a fireball? I don't know. But don't forget, don't conflate two things. We're talking about the official story and a 757 that would have fuel in the wings at the official story alleged impact point down south of the center line. The white plane, according to Cimino from the evidence, did not have, it was a drone, a fiberglass drone that had no fuel in the wing tanks. If it hit the poles, it could have done what you see to the poles, deflected it over to the heliport, and then I think they actively destroyed it before it hit the wall. Okay, now even if a 757, the official story allegation, had gotten through 5 light poles in a row without already exploding or crashing before it got to the wall, which Kolstad said it would have, for sure, after hitting only a single light pole, not 5, and gotten through those 6-foot-high spools without knocking them over, which the photographs say they weren't, a plane the size of a 757 even could not have penetrated the newly hardened outer wall. Why is that? That wall, this is a graphic from the Pentagon Building Performance Report showing the hardened wall. It was 2 feet thick. It had been specifically hardened in many different ways over the previous year or so to specifically withstand truck bombs like Oklahoma City, in the wake of Oklahoma City, truck bombs, bombs at the wall, and high force lateral impacts, i.e. a plane impact. Because the Pentagon was always worried that some plane, even inadvertently, would have a mechanical problem from Reagan Airport, only a little over a mile away, and accidentally crash into the wall and kill a bunch of people. So it also had a Kevlar mesh, like a bulletproof vest, that was inserted into the wall itself. So the wall, the new wall, including where the official story says a plane penetrated that outside wall, the wall was specifically designed to prevent that penetration. It was like a huge bomb and plane-proof vest. Now, all right. This is an example of what a flying Canadian goose does to the nose of a plane. Many people don't know, but the nose of a plane is very lightweight material because that's where the navigation equipment is, and it's very easily destroyed, even by a single flying Canadian goose. Now we're going to see what happened to the nose of a large airliner about the size of a 757 when it hit a completely non-reinforced wall, far thinner than the Pentagon's, going at a mere fraction. I think this is only about 88 miles per hour of the speed claimed for Flight 77. Now, the point of these last few slides is that I believe the evidence shows that even if the official story were true, Flight 77 hit the wall at column 14 on wedge 1, it wouldn't have gotten through the wall. Summarizing so far, the official story claims that after striking 5 light poles in a row, the leading edge of the wings, and somehow making it through that newly hardened wall, specifically designed to prevent a plane impact or a bomb or a terrorist attack succeeding, without any of its fuel wing tanks exploding or the wings flying off. There were no wings found outside the Pentagon. The official story claims that the plane, after getting through the wall, which is here, this is coming into the building, after it got through the wall, then and only then did the fuel in the wing tanks explode, which is absurd. And the official story claims, this is from the Purdue University simulation, The official story claims that the plane had to got in somehow through that newly hardened Kevlar reinforced and steel reinforced wall, 2-foot thick wall, and only after it got inside that it was progressively shredded, and that somehow all of this progressive shredding through these still standing columns in the way, that it somehow created itself into a quasi-liquid fuel and debris slurry. That's actually taken from the Pentagon Building Performance Report, and that this slurry that is being forced apart further and further by these still standing columns after the attack is over, somehow magically, when it got to 3 rings in through all of these still standing columns, reconstituted itself, went around the columns, reconstituted itself into this perfectly focused round cone of energy in order to create this perfectly round hole on the inside of the 3rd ring in, the so-called C-ring exit hole. And that's a very early photograph of that with the smoke still smoking. All right. And the official story claims that somehow that quasi-liquid slurry, after the plane got inside, and these are all these little squares here from the Pentagon Building Performance Report are still standing columns, that it somehow, in spite of its being dispersed and then came back together in a perfect cone, that it was able to burst this the C-ring exit hole, perfectly round exit hole, of about 12 to 16 feet in diameter, despite the fact that Dwayne Dietz, who is the former NASA Director of Research Engineering and a top 9/11 researcher and activist and speaker from San Diegans for 9/11 Truth, he's analyzed the Pentagon Building Performance Report's own graph, showing that there is no possible so-called penetration path between the outer wall and the so-called C-ring exit hole that doesn't, from any possible alleged entrance hole, that doesn't have multiple still standing columns after the alleged penetration path inside the building. It's just completely absurd.
The official story talked about the time of the commission.
I'm going to hold questions because we're doing a tape, if it's all right. Okay. Now, the official story also claims, and this is from the Pentagon's Building Performance Report also, this is the Pentagon First Floor West, okay? This is a graphic that shows where the FBI claims, and the Pentagon, from the FBI's data, claims that the bodies of dead victims were recovered. And they claim that, and this is the so-called entrance hole, and that's the so-called C-ring exit hole right there. This is the drive, the AE drive, which is where you can drive a car, between the inner C ring and the beginning of the B ring, which would be here, and then the center courtyard would be up here. The official story actually claims that after this plane somehow got through that newly hardened wall designed to prevent any plane from getting through, that this penetration path, this destruction path, that the victims, that there were at least 30 victims, if not more, that ended up, all of their bodies, in a pile outside that C-ring exit hole. Wow. But those are supposed to be bodies, including both people from inside the building and from the plane. Those inside the building are blue, I believe, and the orange ones are from the plane, or vice versa. So if we go back and see that C-ring exit hole, of course, well, that's after, but you'll see another photograph. This is after they've cleaned it up a bit outside. Okay. Let's see. Okay, yes. All right. We have to go back a little bit. We have to go back quite a bit.
We haven't seen any of those forwards there.
We have to go back quite a bit. Oh, I'm going forward. I apologize. I apologize. Okay. All right. So anyway, this is the official claim, that there were dozens and dozens of bodies that spilled out of that so-called C-ring exit hole, including passengers from the plane. Well, by an amazing coincidence, in the Pentagon rubble, the government, the Pentagon itself, claims that there just happened to be, this is their official story, 5 unidentified remains that it assumes were hijackers, which happens to be, assumes were hijackers, but can't prove it, even though the Pentagon's own autopsy report says there were no Arab DNA in any of the remains. But the official story claims that the very same number, 5 unidentifiable remains, were found in the Pentagon rubble that it presumes not to be hijackers. And just to be sure that the whole thing would be confused forever, they took those remains, re-incinerated them, and then dumped them in a landfill. But according to the Pentagon's own spokesman, immediately after 9/11 in a Pentagon press conference, you can read the entire transcript on the web, I think it's still on DOD's own website, there weren't any victims or any plane parts of any kind outside the Serene exit hole. And he was sent by his boss there immediately after the attack to take the photographs. His name is Terry Mitchell. He is in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, Audio-Visual Division. He went to take the photographs and presumably also videos. We've only seen photographs so far, however. He was given immediate access to that AE drive where the later report claims all those bodies were even beyond the C-ring exit hole. And he answered media questions about a photo of the C-ring exit hole that was put up on the wall at the Pentagon's own press conference on September 15th. This is what he said to media people who were completely confused because they took a look at the picture and they didn't see any evidence of a plane. And he said, in response to a question, there is a hole in the C-ring. They, without saying who they is, suspect that this was where part of the aircraft came through. Although, and then he gives his experience, I didn't see any evidence of the aircraft down there. This pile of the debris outside that C-ring exit hole, where that previous graphic, which was published later, claims that all these bodies were found, he said, the pile of stuff outside the C-ring exit hole in the AE drive here, as he was pointing to the photograph, is all Pentagon metal from office stuff. None of that is from the aircraft whatsoever. Pentagon's own spokesman. As you can see, this is still the quote, they've punched a hole in here. That was punched out by the rescue workers to clean it out, to clean the debris out, and to get any victims out. So this is this round, clean exit hole that he was referring to. And note the words punch out. There's actually the words punch out on both sides. It's easier to see here than there. But this is a very important symbol. It's a circle with an upside down A and a cross across the A. And you're going to see what that symbol represents. Just as he said, this inverted A, this is a close-up, is the International Personnel Rescue System symbol for dead victim removed. The hole was made, obviously, for the exit of Pentagon personnel who might have been trapped inside and for the entry of rescue and cleanup teams going in, just as Terry Mitchell said. And then here, and according to shape charge explosive expert, mechanical engineer Dr. Michael Meyer, who is quoted in David Ray Griffin's books, this so-called C-ring exit hole is the very signature of a shape charge explosive, not of a blunt force impact, like the allegations of the official story. He says it is physically impossible for the C-ring wall, as in the photographs of the C-ring, so-called C-ring exit hole, to have failed in a neat, clean circle like that from a kinetic impact, a blunt force kinetic impact. Physically impossible. And he says, on top of it, that that's what a shape charge explosive result looks like. Now, in addition to the alleged plane exit hole, which is here, so this is one of the Pentagon's own aerial photographs shortly after the attacks. This is the alleged entrance hole, the alleged exit hole in the C-ring, 1, 2, 3 rings in. This is after the wall over the alleged entrance at column 14 has already collapsed. And you will notice that this point, this exit hole, there's a kind of sooting around that exit hole. Well, it turns out that that so-called exit hole is just one of 3 so-called exit holes that the Pentagon itself labeled exit holes in this graphic that it provided to the Washington Post immediately after the attacks, where it, and I discovered this, where it states clearly in this legend that there are exit holes. That's plural. And this graphic, this legend, those are the Orange dots, there are 3 orange dots. One, they're labeled 1, 2, and 3. Those are the exit holes. There are 3 of them. And by the way, those were cited by Navy and Pentagon sources. And this is a different aerial photograph of the inside of the sea ring, with the center courtyard being this way and the alleged entrance hole over here. These are the 3 so-called exit holes that are also very clearly marked in this graphic that was published in the Washington Post. That's the one that the official story claims is the exit hole of the plane. And these are the other 2 that are mentioned on that graphic provided to the Washington Post. Now, this is fascinating to me. I put this information out a few years ago when I first discovered it. This is from I'm not going to name who it is on this tape, but this is on the website of someone who claims to be a 9/11 truth researcher. And he has doctored this, the original. He's moved the legend from here to here, and he's changed it to read exit hole. Plain exit hole, singular. He's removed the 2 and the 3, and now there's only 1. So that's a plant. The elephant in the room that, amongst other things, proves the official story false is time. And we've already seen a lot about this. But now I'm going to give you a lot of evidence, overwhelming evidence, that the first violent event at the Pentagon was in fact coterminous with, or even before, the approach and destruction of the white plane that stopped the heliport clock at 9:32 and 30 seconds. There's many other lines of evidence that the official story time is at least 5 minutes too late. Okay? Interestingly, the Army itself, after the attack, did not know the time of the attack. So they asked seismologists, the same seismologist, professional seismologist team that did the analysis of the Richter scales, the Richter scale readings for the World Trade Center attacks and the Pennsylvania attacks. They asked them to look at the Richter scale seismology record for the 5 closest readout stations to the Pentagon, and this is what they found. This is from their official report, which you can read online. They found no seismic signal for the alleged official story impact time of Flight 77. 0. And yet, and this is a quote from Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Dave Gapp, who is he's a magnificent person. Dave Gapp is a top activist for San Diegans for 9/11 Truth. He's out there every single Sunday educating people in front of Navy ships in the harbor at San Diego. And he's a 30-year veteran of the Air Force. He was a senior aircraft crash investigator, and he was the chief master air attack planner for the Iraq and Afghanistan wars before he retired from the military service. He told me, quote, if a 757 had struck anywhere near ground level, from his 30 years of experience as a crash investigator for the military, there would have been a seismic signal, and there was no seismic signal. Also, the date and time. This is the famous, one of the famous 5 frames that were in turn taken from there were 2 cameras in the parking lot here, looking at the west side of the Pentagon. This is from the north end, looking south towards the official story impact area. And in one of the famous 5 frames, you can see that the fireball is in fact on the south or farthest side of the heliport firehouse, which is completely consistent with the reports about the white plane. And you will notice that the date on this famous, this is the only fireball frame of the famous 5 frames taken from those 2 famous video cameras in the parking lot. Notice it's September 12th. It's not September 11th. And notice that it's 5:37 p.m. It's not at 9:37 and 46 seconds in the morning.
Those were released by the media?
Yes, this is released by the FBI held this. The FBI got it from the Pentagon. The FBI is in charge of all evidence, including video evidence. And then they released this. This was one of the 5 frames leaked in the spring of 2002. And then the actual videotapes of which those previously leaked 5 frames had been leaked were actually made public, the entire 2 videotapes, in the Moussaoui trial in 2005, I believe. 2005 or 2006. Okay, so what is the explanation for this being September 12th and the wrong time? Wrong date and wrong time on this is the piece, the single frame that the media worldwide showed on the front page of almost every newspaper in the world as alleged proof of a plane hitting the Pentagon on 9/11. All right. The date and time on this below frame is the Pentagon now claims that that's the date and the time that the frames were downloaded from this security camera in the parking lot. However, if that's true, a security camera is completely worthless without a date and time stamp of when the actual frames were taken. So if that is when they downloaded it, they have explicitly hidden the exact time, let alone the date, of the fireball. Well, why would they hide the time of the fireball? Because they know that it wasn't at the time they claim Flight 77 hit the building. They claim it hit the building verbally in the 9/11 Commission report and everything else at 9:37 and 46
It
seconds.
says number 4 impact on the photo.
That's
It's
correct.
in typeface.
Yes.
It says September 12th.
That is correct. And
The
this,
security camera wouldn't print number 4
no,
impact on it.
and it doesn't print.
So-
That's just my point, though. Yeah, this is proof alone. The photograph is doctored, and the Pentagon also claims that that is the date it was and time it was downloaded, not the date the frame was taken by the security camera.
It's also not the right aspect ratio for a standard camera image.
Well, I don't. Could you mention that in Q's and A's? Because we just can't hear the comment. Okay, now this is very important. Most people don't know this. It's mind-boggling, really. When the 5 frames from one of those 2 video cameras in the parking lot that were very close together, when those 5 frames were leaked in early 2002, there was an ordinary citizen who put in an FOIA request to the FBI, which holds all the evidence from the Pentagon and all the rest of the attacks of 9/11, and he said, I want you to review all the 85 videotapes that in the public press we have been told that you hold, he understood from the Pentagon attack. I want you to review them all and let me know which of those show any evidence of an impact on the wall. Okay? And an honest FBI special agent investigator looked at all 85. And she responded in a sworn response. You can read that response on the net. This is the critical paragraph from it, from McGuire's statement. You can see the whole thing at www.flight77.info. Quote, out of the remaining 13 videotapes, she'd already eliminated from 85 down to 13. All of those from 85 down to 13 couldn't possibly, she said why, have had anything to do with a plane impact. She said of the remaining 13 videotapes, which did show the Pentagon crash site, alleged crash site, 12, that is all but 1, only show the Pentagon after the alleged, I'm adding alleged, after the impact of Flight 77. She says, I determined that only 1 videotape showed the impact of Flight 77, she's assuming it hit the building, into the Pentagon on September 11th, and that is this famous videotape from which the famous 5 frames was taken. We now know there were actually 2 in the parking lot. But this is all there is. And if this is all there is, there ain't no evidence of a plane here. This is only evidence of an explosion. Now, it may be the white plane explosion, but there is no evidence in the photo of a plane. All right, and I've already given you that. So why is the Pentagon hiding the attack/fireball time? Because the first violent event happened more than 5 minutes before the official story says. Whatever happened that caused the heliport fire clock to stop 5 minutes and 16 seconds before the official story alleged impact time. So this should also give you a hint at what else happened at the Pentagon. There wasn't just a white plane coming in on a south path that exploded into a fireball just beyond the heliport firehouse near the helipad. This should give you a hint as to what else happened at the Pentagon. The FBI's official 911 investigation code name is Pent Bomb. It's not Pent Plane. And that stands for Pentagon Twin Towers Bombing. You can go to the FBI's own website and see this for yourself 5 minutes from now. The FBI also lied to their face to the Jersey girls when they met with their FBI briefers. They asked the FBI briefers why, if the official story were true, that their code name for the whole investigation was Pent Bomb. And the FBI agent lied to them and said, well, that's because all of our investigations end in bomb. Well, that's just flat out lie. The anthrax investigation, which is directly linked to 9/11 because the anthrax letters were dated September 11th. The anthrax investigation doesn't end in bomb. It's called Amerithrax. And in addition, the code names for FBI investigations we already know to be about proven bombings do end in bomb, just like Pent Bomb, Pentagon Bomb. An example, the closest example we have, the Oklahoma City bombing investigation code name is Oak Bomb. It's not Oak Thrax or Oak Plane or Oak Rider Truck or Oak Truck. It's Oak Bomb. Okay. That Pent Bomb is the code name of the entire 9/11 investigation, was reconfirmed directly by FBI Director Mueller himself in the cover story issue 2011. He said in the May 10th issue 2011, quote, the FBI's Strategic Intelligence Operations Center filled to capacity on 9/11 and remained that way throughout Pent Bomb, the FBI's cryptonym for Pentagon Twin Towers and bombing. So there's no question whatsoever that the official code name for the entire federal government of the 9/11 attacks is Pent Bomb. Why bomb? That is because part of the real story at the Pentagon, besides that white plane and the helicopter at the helipad, is inside the building explosives, just as it is at the Pentagon, which has already been proven by David Ray Griffin and Richard Gage and Niels Harrod and Professor Stephen Jones and many others. But before we get to this compelling evidence for inside the building explosives at the Pentagon, first I want to go back to the question of time and what Donald Rumsfeld said.
Barbara, I just want to give you the time check.
It's 9:05.
Yes.
I can see the clock. Okay. The first attack at the Pentagon, and there was more than one, that is the first violent event at the Pentagon, was not, as we've seen, at almost 9:38. It wasn't even when the white plane was destroyed at 9:32 and 30 seconds. It was just after 9:30, and it was inside Wedge 2. So if this is the west wall of the Pentagon, there's the center line, there's the heliport, official story alleged impact point down here in the south. Wedge 2 starts to the north or the left of that center line. April Gallup's desk was in Wedge 2. It was not in Wedge 1 anywhere close to the official story alleged impact point. All right. It was in Wedge 2. Wedge 2 E-ring Army specialist April Gallup's wristwatch also was stopped by a major internal explosion. She insists her wristwatch is stopped right at or seconds after 9:30. That's inside the building in the Wedge 2 to the north of the center line. She also says, and this turns out to be extremely important later, that this huge explosion that almost killed her and killed many other people around her happened literally as she hit the on button on her computer. Why is that important? She says that the only fires she saw as she tried to escape through the rubble after that explosion, as she hit the on button on her computer, were fires coming out of the Army area computers. The first, okay,
Fires coming
out of the computers. That has been published in David Ray Griffin's books. All right, also this is evidence that the other converging consistent lines of evidence, besides the stop clocks at or shortly after April Gallup stopped wristwatch at 9:30 or thereabouts, The stop Pentagon heliport clock stopped right after 9:30. Other inside the building clocks, I've already shown you the photographs from the Navy area, stopped a little about 9:31 and 40 seconds. This is also, these first media reports, even mainstream media reports, were not that the Pentagon would see it close to 9:38, which is how the official story solidified, but just after 9:30. So Reuters, USA Today, New York Times, US News and World Report, they all originally said in the very earliest reports that the Pentagon was attacked at about 9:30. Official testimony and records also say that the official attack was right around 9:30, much earlier than the official story. White House counsel and later Attorney General Alberto Gonzales said in an official taped lecture at the Naval Postgraduate School, which tape I have, quote, the Pentagon was attacked at 9:32. That Pentagon heliport clock stopped at 9:32 and 30 seconds. The FAA's official initial timeline said the Pentagon was attacked at 9:32. Denmark's foreign minister, about to be foreign minister, on 9/11 was in Washington, D.C., looked out a plate glass window to the direction of the Pentagon and saw the smoke cloud, the big smoke cloud, start to go up, and looked at his watch and said it was between 9:30 and 9:32 and 9:34 from his recollection. Again, couldn't possibly have been as late as 9:38. So if the Pentagon was really attacked right around 9:32, you would expect that there were major Washington, D.C. area official reactions immediately after that, not waiting until after about 9:38, which there were, lots of them. I'm going to have to go through these slides a little bit faster than I would like to, but you can see all the slides. Give me your email. I'll send you the PowerPoints. As you probably know, there was an E-4B command and control plane that was circling around over Washington, D.C., over the White House towards the Pentagon. It was up there at approximately 9:30, and then the Pentagon explosion happened after that, and after that, the White House was evacuated, and the Capitol was evacuated only after the real Pentagon attack at approximately 9:32. And I give the evidence for that. So the Pentagon attack, actually the real Pentagon attack right after 9:32, triggered the White House and other federal building evacuations. This Washington Post on September 11th said so on its online website, reporting. The 9:32 Pentagon attack, the real time, approximate time, also finally triggered the Secret Service to finally take Bush out of the Florida classroom. Not after World Trade Center 1 was attacked, not after World Trade Center 2 was attacked, not after on ABC News, as I was watching a split screen on the morning of 9/11, after World Trade Center 1 and 2 were attacked, and on one screen, Bush was sitting in the classroom still, on the other, innocent Americans were jumping to their desks from the towers. They still didn't remove him from the classroom. They only removed him from the classroom right after the real Pentagon attack, which was right around 9:32. In response to the real time of the initial Pentagon attack, Andrews Air Force Base suddenly went on alert. The offer of interceptors was originally made to the Secret Service by Major Daniel Crane of Andrews Air Force Base immediately after the second World Trade Center tower was hit in New York City, and was declined by the Secret Service in Washington. But the Secret Service suddenly changed its mind, not after the alleged official story time of the impact of the Pentagon, but right after the actual attack of the Pentagon at 9:33, 30 seconds after the white plane came in and exploded, and the Marine Corps helicopter lifted off. At 9:33 also, Langley Air Force Base interceptor pilot Dean Eckman received his first shoot-down order for any planes coming within 30 miles of Washington. Now, that is at a time when the official story says that Flight 77 was still dozens of miles outside of Washington. Even in New York City, it only happened after the Pentagon was actually hit, right around 9:32, that they finally closed the New York Stock Exchange. They didn't even close it after the second World Trade Center tower was hit, and people were jumping from the towers. Firefighters were at the Pentagon fighting fires from the real attack at the Pentagon way before the official story impact time. How do we know that? The first ones there were the heliport firehouse firefighters. They immediately got out from under the man, when they realized they were alive and started fighting the fires. And there were all kinds of firefighters fighting those fires at the official story alleged approach and impact time. There was no second plane that approached the building and crashed into the wall. They were all standing there already fighting the fires from the real crash that happened at 9:32. Additional evidence for primary inside the building explosions, in addition to the white plane. Evidence that the Wedge 1 collapse, there is actually some evidence, I'm about to show you, that that famous Wedge 1 collapse of the wall over the alleged official story impact point was due to pre-placed explosives on the external support columns. This is an interesting comparison of, this is Oklahoma City after we know that it wasn't just the external Ryder truck bomb. There were 4 internal bombs that were placed. And at the Pentagon, this is the outside of the Pentagon after the collapse. Okay? Structural similarities. Witnesses to primary inside explosions. By primary, what I mean by that is they had nothing to do, couldn't have anything to do with a plane impact and resultant fires from a plane impact. They're primary, they stand alone. They're inside building the explosion from some kind of pre-placed charges, same as at the World Trade Center. Okay. Lieutenant McCowan, he was at the first floor D ring in the Naval Command Center. The Naval Command Center was the second and third rings in. None of the Naval Command Center was the outside E ring. It's, quote, it sounded like a series of explosions going off. It sounded like a series of bombs exploding, similar to like firecrackers when you light them and you just get a series going off. This is almost identical language to the famous description at the World Trade Center. Bang, 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 like somebody said, a series of firecrackers going off. Lieutenant Colonel Thurman, second floor D ring. Same ring, second ring in, second floor, this is the first floor. To me, it didn't seem like a plane at all. To me, it seemed like it was a bomb. Being in the military, I've been around grenade and artillery explosions. He's saying he's been around explosives. It was a 2-part explosion to me. It seemed like there was a percussion blast that blew me kind of backwards into my cubicle to the side, and then it seemed as if a massive explosion went off at the same time. Uh-oh. Oh, here we go. Little delay. All right. Okay. Now, this is very important. I discovered this. This graphic, again, you've seen this once. It's the one that Dwayne Dietz analyzed. This is the same graphic from the Pentagon Building Performance Report, which shows this is the alleged impact point. There's column 14 on the outside wall, and there's the alleged C-ring exit hole of alleged Flight 77. The importance of this graph here is, it's hard to see, but right here in the middle in wedge 2, that's the D ring. And why is that important? Because these are the D ring. It's the second ring in, where these experts believe there were internal bombs. Well, guess what? The Pentagon's own building performance report shows in this little orange triangle in the second ring, D ring in, the D ring, second ring in, it claims that it's the second floor, the second floor and the ceiling of the first floor that where was a huge vertical pressure wave. And the Pentagon Building Performance Report itself states that this was probably due to an independent, that is, they make it clear, of any plane impact, an independent explosion of any plane. As fire from a plane, if it had hit, would have at most collapsed the second floor downward, not thrust it hugely upward. So this is further evidence of inside the building explosions, which almost certainly means that this very important photograph of an explosion at precisely the alleged impact point is probably that very explosion, but it's of an explosion that went from the inside out, not an impact from the outside in. And notice that at the time of this explosion, and very important, when I showed this slide yesterday evening at the Seattle 911 Truth group event at Town Hall in Seattle, and in the Q&A section, an expert from the military took the mic and said that he'd never seen this photograph and that is not what an impact fire looks like. That is what an explosion looks like, an explosives. And notice that, and also that fireball lasts an extremely short period of time. And notice that the major smoke cloud going up to the south from the diesel generator trailer, which the official story alleges the right wing of Flight 77 hit, is already very well established at the time of this very short duration explosive charge. And also over here you have the heliport area, which has a completely independent smoke cloud from the white plane.
Now, where'd that photo come from?
This is an official Pentagon photo by a Pentagon photographer. Which one, and the site is in my book that I'm finishing. All right, now I want you to compare this photograph, because he said that is not an image of an impact. This is an actual image of a military test of running a plane into a concrete wall, and the Pentagon wall is a concrete wall. Running it into a concrete wall, and you have all this massive pulverization of concrete, which did not happen. All right. This is a working hypothesis, but I think there's a very real possibility that what you're seeing here is a thermite explosion. It looks like thermite. So I have to ask myself, was thermite placed at or around these destroyed columns on the outer section of this alleged plane penetration area of Flight 77? Why do I think that? And there was an autopsy of the concrete in this destroyed area at the alleged impact area, and they found out that it was extremely intense heat, and it actually turned the concrete to mush, and that mush was had a reddish and orange tinge to it due to the presence of iron. That's from the actual report. Now we know from the analysis at the World Trade Center that thermite, that one of the signatures of thermite reaction is in fact the presence of iron, of molten iron. That's an example of the inside of one of these external and internal columns inside the upgraded section of the Pentagon. All right, also this is again that same famous image from the Pentagon Building Performance Report. This is the alleged impact area out here. These little orange squares are what the official story claims are the columns that were destroyed by the alleged impact of Flight 77. Note that there are 8 of them. That is not true. I will prove that to you. This is probably the most important photograph I've ever found at the Pentagon. Why is it important? This is the only photograph I found. It's by a Pentagon photographer. It's the only photograph I found that was taken after the initial fires were put out at the alleged impact point. This is column 14. Our heliport is way over here. This is the alleged impact point of Flight 77. This is the second floor. This is the first floor. You could see that this, if you look carefully, you can see in a high-resolution version of this. That column, that column, that column, and that column are still present. They are bowed out. They are not smashed in. That column is present. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4 columns missing. There are not 8 columns missing. There are not 8 columns missing. There are only 4 columns missing. Not only that, most Pentagon researchers show you only a photograph from about here up because you can't see this area. This is before the collapse happened right over here, but after the initial fire was put out. So you can see the structural damage and lack thereof very clearly. Most Pentagon researchers only show you from here up, and they claim that that was the so-called entrance hole of the plane right there. And they show you a photograph that has so much mist from the fire hoses or smoke that you can't see that that vertical column is still present. It's impossible. This is not an entrance hole of a plane. And this is not anywhere near the width of a plane, which is, this is only 50 feet wide of the missing columns, and a plane is the 757 is 156 feet across. Again, same You've seen this before. This is the alleged impact point of Flight 77, and it again shows these columns bowed out, which you can also see in this photograph. These are these columns. So this area here is this area here. But this is after that fire was put out. Okay, so again, the literal smoke and fire hose spray, this is what you normally see. This is the photograph that you've always seen by other Pentagon researchers, including Jim Hoffman and others, who say, oh, well, that's an impact hole of Flight 77. They show you one that you can't see, that still standing vertical column, and you can't tell that you're not even looking at the first floor. And the Pentagon Building Performance Report itself says that 95% of all the internal damage was on the first floor behind that screen. We have seen that the physical evidence clearly supports primary inside explosives pre-placed at the Pentagon, same as at the World Trade Center. What do the witnesses say? Same thing. There were many reports of explosions and explosives throughout the chain of command at the Pentagon, from the very highest levels on down, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff himself. First, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld and his 3-star top military aide. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld was asked by Sam Donaldson shortly after the attacks what he thought happened. He said, a bomb? The acting head of the National Military Command Center on 9/11 was Captain Charles Leidig. A quote from the official report. Captain Charles Joe Leidig, had no awareness of Flight 77, they're assuming it was Flight 77, coming back to Washington. His first awareness was when he received a call from Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld's 3-star aide, that's a very high-level military officer, who asked Captain Leidig to investigate whether it might be, 3-star aide who asked if he felt the explosion in the building. This is Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld's own call, and asked Leidig to investigate whether it might be a terrorist attack, explosion in the building. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff himself said that the smell of explosives that's totally different than jet fuel smell was overwhelming when he first arrived at the Pentagon. These witnesses to cordite, the very distinct smell of cordite, which is gunpowder, is an extremely distinct smell from jet fuel, which is basically kerosene. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hugh Shelton, upon first arriving at the Pentagon, approaching it on 9/11, has said in his written memoirs without hesitation, the smell of cordite was overwhelming. That is explosives. People shouted in the corridor outside of my office, according to Don Perkel, a witness, that a bomb had gone off, even before stepping outside. This is as it was happening, not later, even when General Shelton arrived. I could smell the cordite. Then I knew explosives had been set off. And there were many other witnesses, including April Gallup, to the smell of cordite. And remember, the explosions went off in Wedge 2 by her desk in the Army area, not in Wedge 1, which is much further south where the plane allegedly hit. According to the official story, this is very important, according to the official story at the Pentagon, the only primary inside damage, from whatever cause, plane or otherwise, they claim it's a plane, but let's put aside what the cause was. They claim that the only physical damage was to the outer E, D, and C rings. The outside ring, the second ring in, and the third ring in, and the furthest that there was any damage was when the plane parts slurry allegedly poked through the C ring exit hole, and the resulting fires in those rings, and that 90 to 95% of the damage was on just the first floor. Okay. However, that is not what happened. There was also major damage in all the rings, all the way through, almost to the center courtyard. There was major damage in the A and B rings as well. In other words, the 4th ring in and the furthest 5th ring in. I personally did an interview with the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations before and on 9/11, former top Green Beret Robert Andrews. He told me, as he was drawing the diagram, which I have kept, my aide and I had to walk over dead bodies on the inside of the A ring. That's the furthest ring in to the Pentagon, to the inner courtyard. Also, a Marine major to the Washington Post, published on the day after 9/11. The B ring between the fourth and fifth quarters was decimated. The B ring is the fourth ring in, well beyond the so-called C ring exit hole. And again, this is the official story, that it only goes in to the inside of the third ring in, and we've just seen the evidence for massive explosions, damage, and deaths in the fourth ring in and the fifth ring in. There's the center courtyard. Pentagon rescue team to the Washington Post online as the attacks were as just after the attacks on 9/11 itself. Quote, "When we got into the building, we started to feel the heat right away, and as we walked deeper down the hallways, that is further in towards the center courtyard, it just got hotter and hotter. It was just fire everywhere, not so much smoke. You couldn't see a plane, just debris wherever you looked." Again, deeper means further in towards the center. So as we have seen, there was a major external explosion at or just after 9:30 near April Gallup's desk in the outer E-ring of wedge 2. And the alleged impact, I'm just having trouble reading this. The alleged impact point, okay, this is just a summary of what I've already told you. Now we're going to look a little bit more closely at April Gallup's experience. And again, she was inside wedge 2 to the north or the left of the center line where the heliport is. I did a 2-hour sworn videotape interview testimony with April Gallup. Under oath, swearing up, she said that a violent explosion near her desk in wedge 2 off quarter 5, far from the official story alleged impact point of Flight 77, stopped her watch at 9:30, which she has kept and is in her safe deposit box. She thought she had triggered it when she touched the on button on her computer and immediately thought it was a bomb. She has said, "I know what a bomb is like." She was trained in explosives. She was in the Army. She said, "I know what a bomb is like when I hear it and I feel it." She saw no plane parts as she tried to get out of the building with her infant son, no seats, no passengers, no luggage, no smell of jet fuel. She did smell cordite, an explosive, no jet fuel fires. The only fires she saw were coming out of the computers around the outside ring of the Army area where she worked. The floor was not hot. She walked out with only one shoe. She lost one of her shoes. And as you're about to see, here's a photo of April Gallup that I found. This is taken from National Geographic's compilation of images and videos that you can see online. This is April Gallup resting on the lawn. She was not burned at all. This is one of these 2 feet, I don't know which one, was the one where she didn't have a shoe and walked out of the, finally got, she and her infant son, that's the head of her infant son, they're being held by that man while she's resting. And she is unburned, including unburned on the bottom of her bare feet. This is also a very important photograph. It shows, this is after the attacks are over, after the alleged impact point the collapse has happened over the alleged impact point of Flight 77 down here to the south or to the right of the midpoint of the west wall. And you can see that there is this kind of bombed out crater effect over the where the collapse is. But over here, there's another bombed out crater effect where April Gallup's desk was. The only difference is the outer wall is not breached, as it was here at the alleged impact point. Also, April Gallup did not walk out the entrance hole. I found her first report, which was to the Army historian, and that Army historian interviewed not only her shortly after the attacks, but also the people who rescued her and her infant son. And this photograph shows where that Army, the Army historians showed that all of those witnesses, April Gallup actually was able to, she was helped and her infant son were helped out of this blown out window just beyond the end of that same fire truck that the firefighters had walked out of. Now, when she was told by 3 military officers who came to her hospital bed, "No, you walked out of the entrance hole of the plane." That is a lie. They planted that in her mind. She walked out. She was helped out of this first floor window. He said it appeared to be a U.S. military helicopter. I believe that was the MC, Marine Torque helicopter, and that it disappeared behind the building from his perspective on the other side, where the helicopter landing zone is, just like Parsons said. And then the helicopter disappeared behind the building, and then there was the explosion. These are witnesses seeing it from all different angles. The near simultaneity of the liftoff of the helicopter and the explosion also explains why this witness and others like him on the far side, not the west side, looking directly at the west side of the Pentagon, whose vantage points allowed them only to see the helicopter then disappear about where the helipad is and then an explosion, led them to believe that the Pentagon was actually attacked by a helicopter. And in fact, when Cheney was first asked by Reuters what he thought happened before the official lie solidified very quickly, he said that the first report suggested that the attack was by a helicopter. Okay, and again, all this happened at 9:32 and 30 seconds approximately, which is over 5 minutes before the official story says Flight 77 was anywhere near the building. So what about the North Side witnesses? And these are the witnesses that have been particularly interviewed by Citizens Investigation Team, CIT. I do not agree with the interpretation that CIT gives to their witnesses. Neither does Richard Gage, who withdrew his endorsement from the CIT team. And this is the reason I don't agree with CIT. As there is no evidence of any plane coming in and being destroyed at the Pentagon except for that white plane. There's no corroborating, converging lines of evidence for anything but that 9:32 and 30-second plane destruction, approach and destruction. Then, because of that, other than that white plane that exploded near the heliport, the plane that a dozen or so-called North Side witnesses saw go to the north of the Citgo station and the north of the annex, because the firefighters saw the white plane come south, they looked left, it was the south path, has to either be a second plane separate from the other plane, or it had to have come in effectively near simultaneously. I doubt that there were two planes approaching the building near simultaneously. I haven't seen a single witness report that there were two planes approaching the building simultaneously. Also, the Citizens Investigation Team simply refuses. They never ask their witnesses what time it happened. Now, I personally believe the North Side witnesses. I believe they're real witnesses, but there are only about 13 or 14 of them. And there are a vastly larger number of witnesses for a South Side approach. So, either the so-called North Side plane, if it's real, and I honor those witnesses, had to have come in near simultaneously if it, as the fireball and smoke cloud created by the white plane at 9:32 and 30 seconds, and as CIT claims, flown through its fireball. But then CIT claims that there was no plane destruction at the Pentagon, which there was. So it's their interpretation of their witnesses that has to be false. That's a blank screen. Okay. Now, this is back to the Pentagon's own representation at the Pentagon's own press conference shortly after the attacks of the official lie, coming in at a south, this is a south path, south of that center line is what it means on the west wall. And now we're going to see another reason why this simply cannot be the case. This is an overlay of the official story, alleged Flight 77, a large Boeing 757. The official story says that it came in at that diagonal angle and the center of the fuselage, the nose as it were, impacted it at column 14 in wedge 1, which is to the right or to the south of the center line where the heliport is. This is way down to the right, not where the white plane came in. But that can't be the case. It can't be the case because if you look carefully, these are the still standing external, what remains of the still standing external columns of the Pentagon, including one where that right 6-ton steel and titanium alloy engine would have hit with this massive force from the outside, but these are bowed out from a pressure wave from the inside out, not from a massive impact, high force impact of a massive object from the outside in. And also you're aware that at this alleged impact point, which is right there, there are all of these 6-foot high spools that were not bowed over as they would have been disturbed. And then again, here are these outer columns just to the right of the alleged impact point, which is of the center of the fuselage nose ear. They're bowed out. They're not destroyed and they're not bowed in.
Those cable spools were for construction?
They were part of, they were going to get rid of, they were going to, all right, back up. The question was, what were those cable spools for? They were communications cables, and they were left from the upgrade of the inside of Wedge 1, which was going to be officially declared complete the next day or the day after. And then the same team of engineers and construction workers was going to start upgrading Wedge 2, which is just to the north of the center line. Okay? So they were still there because of the upgrade. They were part of the construction crew. There's also something many of you know called the ground effect. The ground effect makes it impossible for a plane, like the official story claims, a large plane, going close to the ground to get anywhere closer to the ground than a minimum of 1 wing's width, and which for a 757 is 56 feet. But 56 feet, this is where it would be. It would be coming in, the Pentagon is only 71 feet high. 56 feet would have it coming in between, right around the 4th floor, between the 4th and the 5th floor. That isn't what the Pentagon claims. That isn't what the 9/11 Commission claims. It claims that it came into the 1st floor, 90% to 95% of the damage in the 1st floor, and 5 to 10% in the 2nd floor.
If you're lower than that, you're talking about wing effect now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yes. The wing effect doesn't let you get any closer than 1 wing's width, which is 56 feet from the ground up in the case of a 757. It would be about there because of the wing effect. But in fact, the official story claims instead it's way down here.
The wing effect causes a stall, or what happens?
Okay, so the next slide. Yet further evidence from true experts, pilot experts, that the official story trajectory, again coming in parallel to the ground, 95% of the alleged impact damage to the 1st floor, which is only about 12 feet to the ceiling. Proof that that cannot be true, that it is physically impossible. That the official story alleged trajectory of any 757, Flight 77 or otherwise, at the claimed speed of over 500 miles per hour just above the ground is physically impossible. It is totally, this is a quote from Air Force and commercial airline pilot Russ Wittenberg. It is totally impossible, physically impossible. A 757 could not possibly have been flown at those official story speeds without going into a high-speed stall. The airplane won't go that fast when you start pulling those high-G maneuvers. That plane would have fallen out of the sky long before, he claims, it got anywhere close to the ground if it was truly a 757 going at the speeds that the alleged flight data recorder said it was. This is even a more important quote. Certified Top Gun U.S. Navy pilot Ralph Kolstad, whom I personally interviewed. He has over 26,000 flight hours, including 6,000 flight hours in Boeing 757s for American Airlines, including the physical planes that flew as Flight 77 and 11 on the morning of 9/11. He states, after reviewing the evidence, I could not have flown it the way the official story flight path was described at the Pentagon. I was a Navy fighter pilot and an air combat instructor and have experience flying low-altitude, high-speed aircraft. I could not have done what these alleged hijacker beginner pilots, what these beginners did, or was claimed that they did. Something stinks to high heaven, unquote, about the official story. Now, I discovered this, and I think this is extremely compelling evidence that a Flight 77 or any Boeing 757 could not possibly have done what the official story says. This is yet another reason. The official story claims that at the time that Flight 77 approached the building at 9:37 and 46 seconds, that it had gone out from Dulles Airport, turned around and come back east, and had only been in the air 1 hour and 17 minutes. And that it was supposed to have gone to Los Angeles with full fuel on board. There are 3 main fuel tanks in a 757. This is taken from Boeing's own website. The smallest one, the smaller one, is in the center fuselage. The 2 largest ones are in the wings. The wings are flying fuel tanks. The official story claims that the leading edge of those wings of a Boeing 757 coming in about 560 miles per hour hit 5 light poles, 240-pound light poles, standing light poles, in sequence, and that these flying fuel bombs did not explode, and that the wings were not even breached. And this is a photograph of one of those light poles that a 757 allegedly hit. They're huge. And this is a graphic of where those light poles are that the official story claims, coming in on that diagonal path, that the leading edge of the right wing hit 2 poles, and the leading edge of the left wing hit 3 poles. Certified Top Gun Navy pilot Ralph Kolstad again. This is an interview with me that I recorded. If a 757 hit a light pole, even one light pole, going at that high speed, it would have ripped open the wing's fuel tank, and that wing would have erupted into flames, into a fireball. That's before it even got to the wall. The wings and probably the entire plane with them would have been destroyed before it could even get to the building, unquote. When the leading edge of the wing of this jet hit just a single light pole, it sheared the wing off. This is an actual event. Sheared the wing off, spilled jet fuel and wreckage over 100 feet, and crashed the entire plane. When this happened, the same thing happened to a larger, that was a smaller plane than a 757 you just saw. But when this happened, hitting 2 light poles to a larger airliner, similar in size to a 757, which was in Detroit in 1987, 18 feet sheared off the left wing when it hit 2 light poles in a row, going at only 222 miles per hour, versus Flight 77 allegedly, one of its wings hitting 3 light poles and the other 2 light poles, without any kind of problem to the plane, that it made it all the way to the wall without exploding first.
18 feet sheared off.
The 18, well, where it, yes, it hit the pole 18 feet in from the tip, yes.
Okay.
And it completely just severed it like a knife cutting through butter.
Did that cause a big fire?
That wasn't stated, so I don't know. I don't know. Yes, I'm trying to find out. Good question. The question was, did it in fact cause a fireball? Did it cause a fireball? I don't know. But don't forget, don't conflate two things. We're talking about the official story and a 757 that would have fuel in the wings at the official story alleged impact point down south of the center line. The white plane, according to Cimino from the evidence, did not have, it was a drone, a fiberglass drone that had no fuel in the wing tanks. If it hit the poles, it could have done what you see to the poles, deflected it over to the heliport, and then I think they actively destroyed it before it hit the wall. Okay, now even if a 757, the official story allegation, had gotten through 5 light poles in a row without already exploding or crashing before it got to the wall, which Kolstad said it would have, for sure, after hitting only a single light pole, not 5, and gotten through those 6-foot-high spools without knocking them over, which the photographs say they weren't, a plane the size of a 757 even could not have penetrated the newly hardened outer wall. Why is this an important photograph? We're back on. This is a very important photograph because you have to get up closer to see it. April Gallup was helped out of this is the first floor window. The heliport is out here. She was helped out of a window just beyond the burned out end of the fire truck over here. This is the absolute center line. This is the big door that was in the very center line of the west wall with the official story alleged impact point of Flight 77 way over here. If you look carefully, you will see that there's all this debris, office debris, from inside the building, that there was some kind of pressure wave from an inside the building explosion or explosions that forced this stuff towards the outer wall, and some of it is actually coming out of the outer wall, perpendicular to the outer wall. Also, there's testimony that the windows also first bowed out, not in. Witness Lieutenant Colonel Victor Correa, who worked in the Office of the Army Deputy Secretary of Staff for Personnel in the direct path of what the official story claims was Flight 77's penetration inside the building, said, instead of the windows being hit in or the walls being hit in, he said, I noticed the windows going out first and then coming back in. And because of that, he said, we thought it was some kind of explosion, that somehow somebody had gotten in there and planted bombs. I interviewed Fort Monmouth, that's an Army Fort Monmouth auditor, Michael Nielsen, one of the people who was tracking the missing $2.3 trillion that Donald Rumsfeld testified to Cynthia McKinney in Congress the day before 9/11 on September 10th were missing and the Pentagon couldn't account for. He said that literally hundreds of Pentagon employees raced down the hall past him out the south side exit. That's the wedge right around the right corner from wedge 1. Out the south side exit shouting, it's a bomb, bombs, it's a bomb. Literally hundreds of people. And this is the only image of a fireball that we have in the public domain. And as I've mentioned before, there's no evidence of a plane impact in this. It's definitive evidence only for an explosion. There were multiple primary inside explosions, independent of any impact. We've already seen April Gallup stop wristwatch, the 932 stop Navy area clock, which is 2 and 3 rings in. Also, according to the official story, the sole survivor of the Naval Command Center, 2 and 3 rings in this case 3 rings in, he claimed that the explosion went off there at precisely 9:43. Well, that couldn't be because of Flight 77, even if the official story were true, because the official story says Flight 77 hit at 9:38, and believe it or not, the official story claims that that plane not only went through that outer wall, specifically hardened to prevent it from doing so, but went in 3 rings and poked its nose or some part of the slurry out of the C-ring exit hole in less than a second. So between 9:47 and 36 seconds and 9:43 is a long time. There was an explosion in the Naval Command Center at approximately 9:33. At 10 o'clock, explosives went off on columns in the alleged penetration path. And at 9:48, another Pentagon explosion was according to the Secret Service log, which is now available publicly. The Pentagon was also expecting explosives, certain people in the Pentagon. According to an AP report on 9/11 itself, they were interviewing someone who was with Rumsfeld. That person said, the Pentagon attack, quote, came minutes after the Secretary of Defense predicted to him there will be another event shortly. Michael Nielsen and his 2 co-workers, including April Gallup, you've already seen those witnesses, saw bomb-sniffing dog teams in the Pentagon Metro stop at 7:30 in the morning. Inside explosives inside the Pentagon, in addition to the white plane, but the inside explosives part of what happened there, explain why there was no advance siren to alert Pentagon personnel of an alleged approaching danger from a plane to evacuate the building, as there was no incoming plane at the time of the real attack, 9:30 to 9:32. The National Military Command Center didn't learn of any incoming hijacked plane until 9:31, which was, that should have said 9:30, that should have said 9:33. It's just an error. There was no way for non-perpetrators, non-inside jobbers, to know that explosives were about to go off in order to trigger an alarm and warn people to evacuate the building. And that was the biggest complaint of April Gallup in her court case, that if they thought a plane was coming, why didn't they warn us to get out of the building? And according to the NBC's chief Pentagon correspondent who was at the building that morning, at 9:45 still, and the official story says Flight 77 hit almost 9:38. At 9:45, still no sirens yet, and no official evacuation order. Primary inside explosions at the Pentagon are absolute proof of an inside job. Outside terrorists could not have done it. It was done by the Pentagon itself. The real story at the Pentagon is that the Pentagon attacked itself on 9/11 with inside the building explosives. I consider that far more important than the white plane, which I believe is part of the cover story, just as at the World Trade Center. Non-insider terrorists would have certainly targeted, as David Ray Griffin and others have noted, the easy-to-hit roof, or gone into the bullseye, the center courtyard, or the offices of the high-ranking officials like the Secretary of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on the far side of the building from the alleged impact point of Flight 77. The last place in the world they would have ever chosen was a place on the most hardened, newly hardened wall at almost ground level. It was least populated, which had been evacuated because it was being upgraded. Also, it was physically hardest to hit because these multiple physical obstacles in the way. A hill, an antenna, all those light poles, the chain link fence, the 6-foot-high cable spools. He would have never chosen the point of the official story impact point. So, why is that important? Whoever really did the attack needed and felt that they needed to take out the functions and the individuals who were in the places where the bombs were placed inside the building. Now we're going to see evidence that at least some, if not all, of the inside explosives pre-placed at the Pentagon were targeted there to take out specific functions. This is from the Washington Post, the day after 9/11. It's actually called the targeted ones. And this claims that the attacks targeted the Naval Command Center. This is a graphic from the Washington Post. This is the alleged impact point of Flight 77. This is the alleged penetration path once the plane allegedly got inside the building. That's the alleged C-ring exit hole. And this little triangle, rectangle here is blown up here. This is the Naval Command Center. And within the Naval Command Center, according to this legend, are these separate individual functions. Number 8 in this little corner is the intelligence cell, the Naval Intelligence Cell. Why does that matter? According to the official story of 9/11, there was only one survivor of the entire Naval Command Center, of this entire area, not just that little cell, but all those offices in the Naval Command Center right there. Only one survivor, and his name was they claim, Lieutenant Kevin Schaefer. Well, guess what? He was hired to be a top staffer on one of the subgroups of the 9/11 Commission report investigating the Pentagon attack. There is a cover-up about what really happened at the Naval Command Center. I personally interviewed the admiral in charge of the Naval Command Center on 9/11, Rear Admiral Hathaway. He told me that it is not true that there was only one survivor, Kevin Schaefer, who was a survivor, very badly burned, over 40 to 60% of his body. He said that Kevin Schaefer was not the only survivor, that there were the majority of the 18 or 19 intelligence analysts who were in that little section 8, right there in that corner. He said that was a hardened room, hardened from bombs, even inside the building bombs, and that they did survive, and that the majority of them survived, that some of them did not survive. Follow the money. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld and the Pentagon's comptroller both publicly acknowledged the day before 9/11 on September 10th that the Pentagon was missing and could not account for $2.3 trillion. Susan Lindauer testified under oath at the Vancouver hearings in mid-June of last year, 2012, that the CIA knew that that was false, that it was actually as high as $5 trillion the day before 9/11. And the Army Fiscal Financial Audit Area and its records were destroyed in the attack in the area close to April Gallup's desk, which was, according to her testimony and others, was from inside the building explosives, and that was the area where the only fires that she saw were coming out of the computers. No evidence of a plane. Flight 77, therefore, not only did not hit the Pentagon, it didn't get anywhere close to the Pentagon. It was never positively ID'd as the eastward flying plane that approached the Pentagon at the official story alleged impact. We know.
Okay, just let you know, last call.
At the official story alleged impact time of almost 9:38. According to David Ray Griffin's analysis and the FBI at the Moussaoui trial, American Airlines public statements, and the Pentagon's public statement, there is zero evidence that the outgoing plane even turned back east. Why is that? Because the claim that the plane that left Dulles then came back, going west, then turned around and came back east, that it was the same plane, that's based upon Barbara Olson's alleged cell phone calls. With the transponder turned off of whatever plane it was that was going west that left Dulles, Dulles Air Traffic Control of whatever plane came back only had a blip. It had no positive ID and had no altitude or speed information. And that was confirmed, you can see the videotape online, by Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta.
But it could have determined the speed.
No, they did not. They did not have the speed when they only had a blip. When they had not sent the C-130 pilot up to try to see the plane, they did not yet have speed. All right. Now, this is another finding of mine. This is a reason why the plane that the official story says came back east and allegedly impacted the building cannot be Flight 77 and can't even be the plane, whatever it was, that first left Dulles. This is very important. Why? This is according to the official records. At 8:54 and 43 seconds, Indianapolis FAA Air Traffic Control was tracking Flight 77 and saw its radar and on the screen with a physical person, a physical air traffic controller, saw that blip of whatever plane left Dulles at 8:20, saw it start to descend. It descended as much as 6,000 feet, according to the Christian Science Monitor, quoted in Terry Masson's book, Pentagon, had descended to 6,000 feet before they lost the radar signal because the transponder was turned off. However, according to the official story, the plane that came back, they claim it's the same plane that turned around and came back after the transponder was turned off. Couldn't have been. Why couldn't it have been? Because the plane that was coming back east, whose blip was picked up, that blip was picked up and then it started to do its descent. It didn't do its descent until 9:01. As the same physical plane can't start descending at 8:56 and also start descending at 9:01. Therefore, the plane coming back east cannot be the same plane that left from Dulles Airport. And because the time of impact is taken from the alleged flight data recorder that the official story claims was found inside the rubble of the Pentagon. That's where they take the almost 9:38 time. The FDR, the flight data recorder found inside the Pentagon rubble, cannot be from the plane that left Dulles. So if the flight data recorder plane, that is the plane that they claim the flight data recorder found in the rubble of the Pentagon, that approached the Pentagon at 9:38, couldn't have been Flight 77, what was it? This is the evidence that it was a military plane. All the Dulles air traffic controllers themselves believed from the way the blip moved that it was a military plane. This is from Daniel O'Brien, who was the specific air traffic controller at Dulles, who was tracking the blip coming back. The speed, the maneuverability, now this is interesting. She says speed. That's an interesting question you had. But according to Norman Mineta, they didn't have speed information. Somehow they must have been inferring the speed. Anyway, she said the speed, the maneuverability, and the way that he turned, we all thought in the radar room, all of us experienced air traffic controllers, that it was a military plane. So what happened to Flight 77? The bottom line is we don't know. This is what we do know about Flight 77. We know, according to the official report, this is including the 9/11 Commission report, that at 9:09 and 55 seconds, that's almost 9:10, the FAA Indianapolis Center reported the plane missing. When it had started to descend, the outgoing westward bound plane that had left Dulles started descending. It descended to 6,000 feet. Then the transponder went off. It was reported by FAA Indianapolis Center to the Air Force that it had probably crashed. Now, last night I learned for the first time from Robin Horden, who is an outstanding 911 researcher and activist in the Seattle area. he has gotten hold of the now public radar records, all the radar records. And he and another radar analyst are analyzing those records. And he told me last night, and I didn't know this until last night, that the radar records appear that after the outgoing westward flying plane that had left Dulles started descending, and just when it was reported by Indianapolis Air Traffic Control as probably crashed to the Air Force, that in fact there were two other blips that started towards it, and then they all went down, as if there were two, in fact, fighter escorts that were escorting it down, and that it appears that it landed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I learned that last night. So, the non-coincidence of, excuse me. All right, so at precisely within 5 seconds of when FAA Indianapolis, FAA Air Traffic Control reported that plane to Air Force Search and Rescue as probably crashed, at this exact moment almost, military, as opposed to civilian FAA, military air traffic controllers, who obviously had been tracking the plane, first reported that they first picked it up. And they later violated all protocol by claiming that it was Flight 77. The non-coincidence of this timing, of this exact timing, is very strong evidence that the military was tracking that eastward flying plane all along via a military transponder on the plane, a military transponder mode, that only the military air traffic controllers and not the FAA could see, the FAA air traffic controllers. And thus for the military there was no so-called radar hole. And that the plane that is alleged to have hit the Pentagon about 9:38 was therefore a military plane. In other words, the plane coming back east wasn't the same one that left. The one that left was a civilian airliner. It went down, landed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base with 2 military escorts at the same time that another plane was allegedly picked up by military air traffic control going back east that they claim was Flight 77. In summary, Flight 77 was nowhere near the Pentagon. We have seen nowhere near the Pentagon when inside explosives went off inside the Pentagon over 5 minutes before Flight 77 was anywhere close to the building. Flight 77 was nowhere near the Pentagon when a white plane, a separate plane, exploded at or near, or was exploded, somehow destroyed, I believe by the helicopter, at or near the heliport. Also, there is zero evidence that whatever plane left Dulles at 8:20 was the same one that was tracked coming back east and was allegedly Flight 77, whose alleged flight data recorder was found in the rubble of the Pentagon. And in addition to that, that flight data recorder was downloaded, the data from the flight data recorder was downloaded 4 hours before it was allegedly even found in the rubble. Even if whatever plane left Dulles was the same that came back, which we can prove that it wasn't, even if it was, and it did come back, whatever plane it was, even if it had hit the Pentagon at the alleged impact point of column 14, which we can prove that it didn't, but even if it did, it couldn't have, according to the official story, the official story claims, penetrated to only the inside the third in-C ring, and also have caused the massive destruction that was found all the way into the innermost fourth in and fifth rings in. And the FDR radar plane, alleged to have been Flight 77, the one allegedly turning around and coming back east, was almost certainly, as we have seen, and why, a military plane and not a civilian plane anyway. There are other slides, but I'd like to stop now because it's 10 minutes to 10. And if there are a few questions, and then we can continue someplace else if you'd like to continue asking the questions, because they close at 10 o'clock. I'm sorry?
The point of, you mean, if the attack came from within or without?
I think you're late coming into the room, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to not answer your question because I've answered it 100 times over. But I'll do that. Okay. Any other questions by people who have been here throughout the talk?
So, a couple of questions that are kind of related. So, first of all,
One question at a time, which I'll repeat for the camera.
So what's the motivation for actually having the second, explosion, the one that we with the impact hole in front of the building? Why not just use the white plane?
Oh, okay. That's a very good question. I think something went wrong with the plan at the Pentagon. The question was, if I understand it, what would be the point of having inside explosives as well as the white plane? It is an inference that the white plane, I believe, was supposed to have impacted at column 14. It did not. They needed to have internal damage that they could blame on a plane that impacted at the alleged official story impact point. So they had to create that damage with internal explosives.
That's not quite it, actually.
Oh, okay.
What's the point of having the other impact?
There is no other impact point.
Well, the only one that we see, where the official story is that the plane hit, and you see the no spectacular line. There's a hole in the Pentagon there, and which they came in. Why do you have that?
All right. It's a little difficult for me to repeat that question because it wasn't quite clear, but I know what you're trying to get at. Let me just say that the person who asked the question is wondering why there would be, if I understand, there would be pre-placed explosives in from the alleged impact point if the plane didn't hit there. Obviously, a plane was supposed to come in, probably this drone, this fiberglass drone, painted and shaped to look like an American Airlines airliner. It was supposed to have hit at the official story impact point, and then right after that, the bomb's going off on the inside to simulate the penetration path of a plane getting into the building, which I've shown couldn't have happened anyway. Yes.
But the point of the bombs inside was they had specific things they needed to destroy, primarily all the accountants working on finding out what happened to $2.3 trillion.
Well, and very importantly, I haven't said what was going on in the Naval Command Center. I don't have time to do that. But you'll see it in the slides.
Is the answer then that the white plane just missed the target?
The white plane missed the intended target.
That's the assumption.
And I believe it missed the intended target because its wings hit the light poles. I'm going to take another question.
On Marine helicopter, do you know what kind of weapons they would have on board?
I don't. The question is if, and it's a working hypothesis, we do know from the radar record that there was an MC, military helicopter, MC almost certainly stands for Marine Corps, at the heliport, lifting up just literally 2 to 3 seconds before the white plane comes in and it's destroyed. The inference from that is something from the helicopter, probably a missile, destroyed the plane. Missile or missiles. That would be my guess. I have not looked into what, it depends upon the helicopter. Helicopters can be outfitted with all kinds of weapons.
Obviously, the question I'm going to ask, I'm going to have to follow up later, but we can begin to discuss the issue. What do we know about the dead bodies?
What do we know about the dead bodies?
I mean, are they related at all to the crew and the passengers of Flight 77?
Well, the most...
Who are those dead bodies? You were saying that there were all these dead bodies in Ring A.
Well, I'm not...
And then now the 30 bodies that somebody was reporting.
Right. Well, it's clear from the witness testimony that was published in the Washington Post and elsewhere that the location of the dead bodies is not where the Pentagon Building Performance Report and the 9/11 Commission report say they were. It's just they're night and day different. Okay. A very important fact is that the Pentagon's own autopsy report states that there's no Arab DNA found. And the official story claims that Arab hijackers were on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. That's as much of an answer as I can give now. I could give more later, and there is more on other slides that I haven't gotten to. You've already asked a question. Anybody else before I take? Okay.
What was the purpose of the 3 exit holes?
Okay.
Did they have to blow somebody up inside them?
No. Okay, the question is what do we understand is the purpose of the 3 exit holes? The Pentagon gave data, the data that the Pentagon gave immediately after the attacks to the Washington Post, which was used to create the graphic that shows 3 exit holes. Then I showed the aerial photograph of 3 exit holes that perfectly line up. Those exit holes, as Terry Mitchell stated, were for entrance and exit of Pentagon personnel. What's important is that 2 of those holes, I wasn't able to say, are actually pre-existing doors. But they had huge smoke around them, unlike other places. So what's important isn't that the doors were called exit holes, but that the alleged exit of the nose or slurry or whatever of the alleged impact of Flight 77 they used the same language to refer to it as they did the pre-existing doors. These were simply entrance and exits for Pentagon personnel, as Terry Mitchell himself said in the Pentagon press briefing.
Barbara, why do you think there's been such reluctance in other 9/11 truth researchers to acknowledge the fakery around the Pentagon attack?
I'm not sure what your question means. The question was, why do I believe that there is such reluctance on the part of other Pentagon research besides myself to acknowledge fakery, to acknowledge that Flight 77 didn't hit the building?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that that's an accurate understanding. The vast majority of 9/11 researchers who look at the Pentagon can see the evidence for themselves and have said that 757 didn't hit the wall, which it didn't. It's the rare individual who claims otherwise. It's just the opposite. Any other questions? Oh, well, I think it's 10 o'clock. So thank you very much. Okay.